Thank you very much. Welcome. Bem-vindo. Bom dia. I was debating which language to do this presentation in. Chose English. Please feel free to follow up with questions during the panel or catch me in a break, because probably some of the ideas that you're going to hear over here are going to be of interest to you. Now, Patrick had an interesting approach to finding out what Logistics 4.0 is. Trusty Google delivered probably substantial hits, about 5 million of them, I would imagine. I'm actually going to explain to you what Logistics 4.0 is in ports and what have we done with some of the ports. So I'm going to use real examples of real projects that will help you to actually understand what's going on. Now, the first one is of course this question is, are we a factory or are we a port? And therefore we're somewhat different. When you look over here at the factory of the future, or the industry of 4.0 on the left-hand side, and you compare to the logistics of the future, which is Logistics 4.0, you'll find plenty of similarities. I wanted to concentrate on three because I noticed that when people are talking about Industry 4.0 and implementing those concepts in ports, we are still too often going in after one particular solution, which is a point solution, which does not solve the real problem that we're dealing with in a port situation. So the first one is, if we can return to the slides, please. We need to be fully digital and network. If we don't network of the individual activities and all of them are not digitalized, then we're not producing value, sufficient value, or we're not producing value at all. When you look at the terminal, they actually have money to spend on the investments. Port authorities are a little bit different. The budgets are very often constrained by the fact that we're regulated by the government. We're owned by public organizations or trusts. So therefore, the money is not readily available for big digital investments as it happens in the terminal situation. So let's look at this, because the first point is, of course, we need to be more digital. So what does it mean in a port to be more digital? Well, first, you need digital ingredients. We are still stuck at the data sharing concepts in ports. If you can run a port which serves 20 vessels a year or 20 vessels a month, you can probably do it still on Excel spreadsheets. However, in Asia, we are actually dealing with ports when we handle about 4,000 calls during the year. And some ports actually handle up to about 8,000 calls a year. That's a lot of calls, that's a lot of vessels to navigate through the port, serve them in a port, and actually send them on the way to the next port. So you need to become very familiar in port authorities with these technologies. I'm going to concentrate on sensors today and show you the IoTs, how they're being used in ports, how we use digital twins, another concept from Factory of the Future or Industry 4.0 that you really need to become familiar with. And I'm going to talk a lot about collaboration platforms, because obviously they are going to be really the future, the next frontier for port authorities. The second thing that you have to consider, besides knowing which technologies will be useful in the port operations, is really area where you need to apply your concepts. And I created this to show you that trying to approach all of the projects that you possibly can digitalize in digitalization projects in ports, you really need to think about who you're going to create the value for. When you look at the bottom layer on those blue boxes, they're telling you that some of your actions will benefit only the carriers. So therefore you'll be spending money, but the carriers will be actually taking the value, which is the entire profit related to this. So everything that you do in a port to accelerate the port call, to turn the vessels faster, you're not going to see any improvement from this because you cannot charge higher rates for faster performance of the port. Your rates are regulated very often. You cannot just increase them at will. So therefore, you're not going to benefit. The carrier for sure will benefit because every hour you're going to save them, that's worth in a large vessel about 16,000 US dollars. Okay? So big gain for the carrier. If you look on the right-hand side, when you're streamlined and sustainable, yeah, obviously you're going to benefit more of yourself. Therefore, the port is going to create the value for itself. Sustainability, big issues. That's energy consumption, energy production and the port facilities. So what I'm really trying to point out over here, when you're spending money, your investors or your stakeholders are going to ask you, how are you going to benefit from that? And you will have to explain, essentially, probably using this as a chart, as a guide, to actually how that value gets created and who is going to take the most of it. Okay, now let's talk about the area that I highlighted. So if you remember the three areas that were I underlined in the first slide, was, besides being digital, is a systems thinking. And here is an example of a project done by the port, which tried to resolve essentially a very simple issue. They are affected by winds. When you have a dynamics of the vessel being moored, you obviously are dealing with situations where you're using fixed bollards and lines of certain strength. Sometimes when the wind is combined with the wave action, using fixed bollards is actually not the best in certain areas of the berths. The same applies also to anchorages, where you're temporarily holding the vessels before they can enter the port. So there's a number of dynamic mooring systems being developed around the world. On the right-hand side, you will see short tension and Cavotec examples. And the port here was trying to determine essentially which part of the port can continue using fixed bollards, traditional approach, and which one should actually consider dynamic bollards or intelligent bollards either from Cavotec or short tension. So what they deployed the IoTs on the water. That's about 20 of these devices floating around the port in various locations, which are feeding in real time information to the analytical engine. That engine originally used the history of the wind and wave action in the port basin, but obviously that history is only as good as the history. What is happening actually on a daily basis, hour per hour, is much better to report this from dynamic devices and read this dynamically to allow for a real-time decision made by the port. The good thing of this is that they were able to essentially use artificial intelligence, combination of machine learning and some of the self-learning algorithm, to actually help them decide which areas of the berth should be equipped with dynamic bollards, so the short tension solution, rather than with the fixed bollards. Those things are not cheap, so therefore you cannot just simply say, okay, I'm going to replace all of my fixed bollards with short tension bollards. So you really would like to have an intelligent support of the intelligent decision and intelligent support of that decision. But there are also additional benefits that have not been considered but got realized. So the first one is, if you're in a port situation, you sometimes get an offer from a carrier to bring in a larger vessel, a new vessel that you've never seen before. Therefore, you really don't know what is the best area to moor this particular vessel, both in a waiting situation, so in the anchorage, and also at the berth. So what you usually do as a port authority, you go out to an engineering company, civil engineering company, and you ask them essentially for mooring analysis. They do this for about $20,000. Not a big gain, but essentially you're doing this per vessel. And what they do, they take the vessel characteristics, they take the weather pattern characteristics, wave action and wind action, simulate the interaction of these elements, and they tell you that it's safe for you to accept these vessels at certain times. Well, in this particular case, this port now can avoid going out to the engineering company to ask them for an individual vessel analysis. They are able to bring the information of the vessels from Lloyd's register. So you can essentially, as a owner, as an armador, you can come to them and saying, well, this is the vessel I'm going to come in with. They will run this to their engine, and they will tell you actually what will be the safe time for you to come to the port. So you can schedule your rotations, and you can schedule your services based on what the port is able to do for you in terms of safe mooring. That's very important. And the secondary benefit that was even more interesting from this port's perspective is this port is affected by monsoons and unexpected weather events. And in this particular case, what they discover is that the decision to close the port and open the port relates to the decision of the human, the harbor master. Okay? And what we discovered in the analysis of the data is that harbor master erred on a side of caution, which means they closed the port too early or they opened the port too late. Now, what that caused in our particular case, a 1 hour of doing this too early or too late was equal about $250,000. Okay, so if you can imagine, we have ports which traditionally, with the weather patterns of the past, were closing maybe 5-6 days for a period of about 6 months. So let's say 12 days lost in productivity over a period of the year. Last year, we had a situation in Asia where essentially Shanghai port, in the first 6 months of operation, was closed for 27 days. In Shanghai port, 1 day of operation equals $1 million loss. So now you can imagine quickly that 1 hour of making a decision by the machine rather than by a harbor master, 1 hour equals tremendous amount of money. And that was actually the biggest benefit of this project, which originally started only with, should we put short tension system in or should we stick to the fixed bollards? So very interesting how benefits accrued were actually coming from the area that was not originally considered for the project. On the top, you will see essentially which technologies we use. Complex sensors, machine learning, real-time decision, so this is the self-learning algorithm, berth planning and optimization, and intelligent equipment. If the port went with partial solutions, they would not be able to realize the value. And I think in ports, you're seeing probably a lot of software companies that are trying to sell you berth plan optimization. Okay? That by itself, it's useful, but what they take only information about the linear size of the berth and essentially size of the vessel, and they give you the best times, how you can organize the vessels along the berth. That itself does not solve the problem of the port. That kind of benefits maybe the terminal and so on, but movements inside the basins, scheduling of your services, that does not depend on simple optimization of the planning on the berth side. Okay, digital twinning. This is very important too. What you see, this is the Tanjung Pagar in Singapore. It's one of our major terminals. We actually have about 7 of them. We're consolidating them into TWAS. But over here, we're starting to see higher level of water and bigger surges. That was not there before. The terminal was actually not planned, or this part of the port was actually not planned for a behavior, the climate changes that we're experiencing right now. So over here you have a simulation of the 3-meter sea rise. Now, you can do this kind of 3D simulation in typical simulation software, but that by itself is not really Industry 4.0. Think processes. So over here, we actually have complex sensors, so intelligent IoTs deployed throughout the terminal and the key walls. And we have the AI deep learning, so this is a self-learning algorithm. This is not the machine learning part of AI. And out of this, we're creating models for the ground transport, the horizontal transport, to actually move between the stacks when the water level rises on the various access roads. So right now it's optimized for everything dry. but as the water is increasing, we're able to model essentially on a 10 centimeter increments up to 3 meters of essentially how to reorganize our internal traffic so we can still maintain productivity of the equipment. We don't cause damage to the equipment from the seawater, and we're still able to maintain the productivity of the port, that is the loading and unloading schedules. Okay, so use of digital twinning is going to play a significant role in port operations. Given the climate changes, I strongly recommend that you consider this. A second project where we're using intelligent twin or digital twin is actually this situation in Singapore. Singapore prides itself in being a smart city. And what it is actually city itself is fully electronically tracked, both at the level of the street and at the level of the buildings. We have modeled the entire city essentially in a digital form. Part of that modeling was also modeling the port and modeling the airport. Why? There are two reasons for this. First one, we're consolidating all of the port activities into TWAS. TWAS is designed to handle mostly container traffic, so that's 60 million containers a year. That's 60 million. And Northport is going to handle bulk, cement, and obviously general cargo. What we wanted to offer in Singapore is essentially a logistics center for Asia. And that means that we're actually enabling transfer of cargo between the port and the airport, either being deconsolidated for the air cargo or reconsolidated from air cargo into sea cargo. And also at the same time, we would like to become a center of cruising. Now, Singapore compared to Miami is of course very, very small. But what it means is we have a terminal location where we would like to actually, at certain times of the day when the big cruise ships are coming in and people transfer between the airport and the port, we would like to push the truck traffic farther out into the north of the island. So they are actually not colliding with the traffic between the cruise terminal and the Changi airport. For this, we're using digital twin and also real-time information from the road sensors and from the port activities and airport activities. So all of the timetables for the scheduled services are inside the twin. And the twin decides essentially how to manipulate access to the city for various types of traffic. And we're doing this by electronic tolling. So essentially, it costs money to enter Singapore by car. And what we can do is we can dynamically schedule this. By certain access points, we can make lower charges for a passenger-oriented traffic and higher for the trucks, or vice versa. And this is how we are essentially conditioning the drivers to become essentially smarter in terms of how they are going to decide which way they are going to pick to drive between any 2 points in Singapore. Okay, another interesting project, Industry 4.0. This combines machine learning, real-time decisioning, berth plan optimization, and integration with TOS of the 2 terminal operators. This project is from Algeciras. Here, what is really important is when you look on the right-hand side of the graph, what you see is ETA at key. The terminal estimated ETA at key is somewhere in the middle of this, okay? So I will get my vessel very quickly between the pilot station and the key. But the port over here actually runs a set of sensors plus software and actually says, no, as a port authority, when I schedule my services to actually get that vessel into your berth in a terminal, it's going to be actually twice the amount of time, which means this is vessel delay. This could be minutes or it could be hours. If you take into consideration that as a port you're experiencing about 30% of the vessels coming delayed, and in some ports actually that number is nearly 50%. 50% of the vessels miss their estimated time of arrival, given to you by the shipping agent or given to you by the terminal or given to you by the ship itself. This actually solves the problem because it allows the authority to schedule their services better, And also it allows the terminal to prepare better for the vessel to arrive at time given by the port authority. Okay, we call this project Pitstop, because essentially this is a coordination of services by the port before the vessel arrives at the berth. Okay? We're also using a very similar approach to assigning anchorages, because sometimes when the vessel comes in late, we cannot serve them when they come. Okay? Over there is a situation with tides and a situation with wave and wind, where we actually have to temporarily anchorage the vessel. Okay? In that particular case, we were using also another part of technology to find the best anchorage location for that vessel, given its size, given the cargo that it carries, given the draft that it requires. So very interesting project. Again, it's in operation, in full operation. This project, platforms, this is the next frontier for the ports. Over here, what you see is example of ports, two ports getting together and offering solution to e-commerce. Now, we might think of e-commerce as essentially buying a little item like this, ordering, and if you have a Prime, it's the next day or the same day, and if you don't have Prime, it's 2 days later. You get it on time. In Asia, we started experiencing e-commerce at a completely different scale. People are ordering suites of furniture. Okay, so this is now e-commerce. For instance, all of these 6 chairs and those 2 tables become essentially single purchase of e-commerce by individual. So since most of the production centers are in Chongqing, in China, and transport into Asia was taking before approximately 20 to 25 days going through Shanghai, so barge to Shanghai and then sea vessel service. Ports of Qinzhou in Singapore got together and decided to offer competitive service. That competitive service essentially cuts the distance that the shipment travels by half and cuts the days from 22 to about 7. In e-commerce, that is very important because the e-commerce vendors promised fixed delivery time. Okay? So you cannot just simply say, well, it arrives when it arrives. The vessel is 30% of the times is late. No, you cannot do this. So here, you need to coordinate between the 2 ports, and you need to coordinate between the terminals in those ports, both on the export side and the import side. Plus, you're crossing the border, so there's also issue of single transaction traveling through 2 single windows. This project is functioning right now. It's growing at about 40% per annum in volume, because there is a single platform that is able to schedule not only the sea portion, so this is a port to port, but actually entirely door to door. So the shipment from Chongqing, the railway segment from Chongqing to Qinzhou, then the sea portion to Singapore, and then dispatch from Singapore. That very often travels, actually does not end in Singapore. It travels to Malaysia, travels to Thailand, travels to Vietnam. So essentially Singapore port made itself a center of e-commerce option for e-commerce vendors from China. And they're big ones. Obviously, you may be familiar with Alibaba. To us, that's the Amazon, essentially, of Asia. Now, what is interesting over here, that there was a requirement for the platform. As a port, what you will experience is that there is no platform serving the port. Okay, they serve the terminals, they serve the carriers, but we don't have anything over here. So I would like to point out that there is Callista. Callista is being developed by PSA, Port of Singapore Authority, and it serves us as a platform which actually coordinates both the trade and coordinates the operations. Okay, that's very, very important. Okay, a couple more things before I finish. Look at this, PCS. Every port is developing PCS. The PCS by itself does not coordinate multi-port behavior, and what it means is we would like ports to share information of the actual departure of the vessel and the next port information about the vessels that leave their port. This project originated between Rotterdam, Port of Rotterdam and Port of Hamburg at the Port Authority level. It's now being extended to Helsinki, Port of Gdańsk, LA Port, Los Angeles ports is in. Singapore is signing up, Antwerp, and a couple other ports. I would strongly encourage you, if you work for the Port Authority, to get in touch with us at connectedports.org, okay, and see whether you would like to contribute some and also get some benefit out of what we're doing over there, creating APIs that could plug in into your PCS inside your port. Last but not least, with this, I'm going to finish this, but I thought it was going to be a little bit of value for you. Do not build islands. This is the biggest thing in Logistics 4.0 is we cannot rely on islands. We need to have connected archipelagos. Experimentation is a big thing. Okay, you will have to spend some money on experimenting. You'll see a lot of ports around the world funding startup ecosystems. Okay, that is an expensive proposition, and it's very difficult to compete against somebody like Singapore, who spends about $150 million a year to fund new startups that are relevant to port operations. But if you do not experiment and you're not connected to other ports, you will not get the benefit of somebody else's learning and spending money. So here in Latin America, it's really important that you get connected to others, to us in Asia or to ports in Europe. And the last one, build a learning culture. The technologies that I showed you, artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, self-learning algorithms, this is not something that your typical IT department would have. Either invest into this yourself or assure that you have a partner who has that kind of skills, because that is really the future of the connected ports and the logistics chains and the Logistics 4.0. Thank you very much.